Hey there. Tonight we're going back in time, but not too far. Just far enough to find ourselves in a trench. Not a particularly famous one. Not the site of a great battle, or a place historians quote often. Just a long, soggy stretch of earth somewhere in northern France. It doesn't matter which trench exactly. They were all, in a way, the same. Damp, unimpressed, patiently waiting to rot both your morale and your boots. But don't worry, we're not charging into battle or planning a stealth raid tonight. There's no heroic music swelling. This is the slow, rhythmic heartbeat of the front line. A place where nothing really happens, but somehow everything changes anyway. So dim the lights, maybe pull your blanket up to your chin and let's settle in. You don't wake up in the trench so much as you become aware that sleep has stopped happening. There's no sunrise, not really. The sun, if it even exists anymore, is filtered through several layers of fog, gunpowder, haze, and the rising steam of yesterday's socks. It's more like the dark gets slightly less persuasive and the gray takes over. Your bed, such as it is, consists of a blanket made from a fabric that might once have been wool, but now mostly feels like betrayal and mildew. It doesn't cover your whole body, so you've spent the night curled like a sleeping comma, knees to chest forehead, pressed into the crook of your elbow. It hasn't helped. Beneath you is a wooden duckboard, a term that sounds charming, but is really just slats over mud. And under that, more mud. Mud that gets inside everything. Your boots, your trousers, your hopes. At some point in the night, you suspect you began fusing with it. A slow, earthy embrace. You try to shift your legs and discover that one sock has migrated halfway off your foot and is now a cold, squishy satellite orbiting your ankle. You consider fixing it, but that would mean moving your arm, which would disturb the thin layer of relative warmth you've managed to trap against your ribs. And so, like a true trench survivor, you ignore the problem until it becomes part of the landscape. The sock, the mud, the slight ringing in your ears. All part of your personal trench ecosystem. The soundtrack of the line. The first sound of the day isn't birdsong. Birds gave up on this place months ago. Instead, it's coughing. Not heroic coughing, not deathbed confession coughing. Just the wet, rattling, indifferent sort of cough that people do when their lungs have decided to express a quiet protest. Then come the whispers. Not strategic whispers, mind you. Just sleepy men mumbling to each other about things that don't matter. What's for breakfast? Spoiler. It's always tea and a biscuit. Whether someone stole someone else's foot wraps, again they did. And if the lice seem bolder, today they do. The whispers are punctuated by the squelch of boots. No one moves gracefully in the trench. The best you can hope for is forward momentum and limited splashing. You hear someone swear softly, followed by the distinct sound of a tin cup falling into mud and not being retrieved. A tiny tragedy, but one that will be mourned for days. A short walk to nowhere. You emerge from your dugout with the posture of someone who never quite evolved to stand upright. The chill has soaked so thoroughly into your bones that you suspect your spine has become a question mark. The trench isn't much to look at. Earth walls reinforced with sandbags, lined with boards and bits of scavenged wood. It smells faintly of onions cordite and socks that died nobly in the night. You trudge 5 paces to the right. That's the latrine trench. You do what must be done quickly and without ceremony, using a shovel as both a seat and a metaphor for your emotional state. No one talks while doing this. It's an unspoken rule. Eyes on the horizon. Pretend the smell isn't aggressively philosophical. On your way back, you notice Private Harper has slipped on the same board again. This is the 3rd day in a row. He lands with a thump, and a splash swears gently and mutters something about the board having it out for him personally. No one disagrees. You make a mental note not to step there, then forget it immediately. Breakfast in a mug. Back at your section, the fire bucket is warming up. Water, black tea, and a faint suggestion of meat paste. The cook, Corporal Dunley, offers you a mug with all the ceremony of handing over a parking ticket. You thank him anyway. He grunts. This is the high point of your social interaction for the day. The biscuit you receive could deflect small arms fire. You dunk it in the tea. It still resists. Eventually, you just bite and accept the consequences. Somewhere nearby, someone is playing a harmonica very badly. It doesn't improve morale, but it's familiar. Familiarity is its own kind of comfort here. The hour of non-essential tasks. After breakfast, it's time to do, well, something. No one's sure what exactly. There are rumors of inspections. Maybe a letter will arrive. Maybe someone will be told to fix the sandbags, though no one ever seems to finish that job. You tie your boots tighter, then looser again, then tighter once more. It passes the time. You sit on an overturned ammunition crate and stare at the trench wall. It stares back. There's a spider slowly weaving a web between 2 nails. You admire its patience. It seems to know something you don't. That's the morning done. And it's only 08, so. Sleepy yet, the morning slips by with the sluggish dignity of molasses, left out in the cold, and by the time the sun has risen high enough to suggest it might actually exist, you've already counted the same row of sandbags 11 times. Nothing changes. The mud still burps beneath your boots. The same rat scuttles across the duckboards like it owns the place, which, in fairness, it might, and the tea you poured into your canteen earlier has now developed a thin film that resists both stirring and optimism. A few men are huddled under the ledge of the fire step, not so much talking as collectively existing in the same space while pretending the trench doesn't smell like boiled cabbage and military-grade loneliness. You sit down beside a man named Watts, who is sharpening a spoon with a butter knife. He says it's for morale. You nod. That feels about right. A sharp spoon might lift spirits, or at least distract from the slow erosion of your will to remain conscious. Around 10:30, though, time here has become more of a polite suggestion than a dependable system. A soft cheer rustles down the trench like a breeze that doesn't quite believe in itself. The mail has arrived, or rather, it has been hurled unceremoniously into a pile near the quartermaster's post, and a young private named Fisher is now sorting through it with the enthusiasm of someone who has only just arrived at the front and still believes in structure. He calls out names, mispronouncing most and misplacing several more. You hear Harrison and then Harrington, and finally, you, the one with the big nose. That's you. You approach, accept the crumpled envelope, and return to your crate seat like a squirrel who's been handed a walnut in a burning forest. The letter is from your sister. Her handwriting is uneven, as though the pen was trying to escape mid-sentence. She writes about things that don't matter, but matter deeply. A neighbor's escaped goat, a broken teacup, and a mysterious rash that has afflicted the family cat. She hopes you're eating well. You chew a corner of your biscuit in response and decide not to elaborate on the local cuisine. She includes a drawing from your niece, 4 stick figures, and what might be a tree, or possibly a wounded turkey, and a pressed flower that has gone entirely beige in transit. You stare at the drawing until the ink blurs slightly, then fold it and tuck it inside your breast pocket next to the other one from last month. It's identical, except that in that one, the stick figures were all smiling. The act of receiving mail has stirred the trench into what passes for energy. Men talk more loudly now, describing relatives with vague affection and occasional confusion. Someone claims their mother has sent a fruitcake. Someone else disputes the possibility. A third man, a corporal with a voice like gravel, soaked in beer, declares that fruitcake is a myth invented by officers to test morale. No one argues. The man with the harmonica plays a few mournful notes that suggest even the fruitcake is sad. You decide to do laundry, by which you mean you remove your socks still damp from yesterday and perhaps the day before, and attempt to rinse them in the communal basin. The water is cold and reluctant, a thin gray soup of unknown origin. You dunk the socks in, swirl them gently, and watch as a suspicious bubble rises to the surface and then changes its mind. Clean is not really the goal. Less tragic is sufficient. You wring them out and lay them on a spare board to dry, pinning them down with 2 smooth stones you found weeks ago and have since named Alfred and Alfred II. With the socks drying and your boots temporarily housing your bare feet, which feel exposed, rebellious, and slightly offended, you lean back and try to read your sister's letter again. It's no longer legible. Either the ink has faded, or your eyes have decided to protect you from further sentiment. Either way, you fold it once more and place it carefully back into your pocket, now warm from your body heat. The flower, which might once have been lavender, or something that aspired to be, crumbles slightly, but remains whole in spirit. Someone behind you is talking about a rumor, something about leave. Not for you, of course, but for someone, somewhere. A man in another division, possibly fictional, possibly already dead. Still, it passes the time, and the telling of it seems to bring a small pleasure to the man's face, so no one interrupts. You glance toward the horizon, though there isn't one. The trench is high-walled and serpentine, snaking through the countryside like a particularly morose garden path. The sky above is thick and colorless, like milk left out during an existential crisis. You remember vaguely the idea of sunlight, of summer mornings on a real street where the ground was dry and your socks didn't carry the emotional weight of a minor Shakespearean character. You try to picture grass, not the word, but the actual stuff. It eludes you. You picture toast instead. That helps, but also doesn't. You hear the rumble of distant shell fire, not close enough to concern anyone, but close enough to interrupt your memory of toast. The socks remain wet. One of the Alfreds has shifted slightly in the mud. You pretend not to notice. The day, if it can be called that, continues. A ration tin clatters nearby. Someone has found a single preserved plum and is now debating whether to eat it or trade it for a cigarette. The decision takes 30 minutes. It is eventually eaten, but only after 3 other men smell it and declare it plum adjacent. The taste is deemed forgettable. The harmonica resumes this time in the key of distant melancholy. And above it all, the sky continues not to break, not to clear, and certainly not to care. You stare at the socks now steaming gently in the mist, and wonder if they'll ever be dry again. You're not optimistic. Somewhere a sergeant shouts about latrine duty. Someone else groans. A rat is heard, but not seen. You close your eyes and consider pretending to sleep just long enough to avoid notice. And as the wind shifts slightly and carries with it the scent of something both burning and unidentifiable, you begin to wonder whether Alfred II has moved again, the socks having failed to achieve dryness in any measurable sense, now hang limply from their perch like pale flags of surrender. You nudge Alfred II back into position with your boot, though your foot is still damp and mildly offended from earlier. The stones, once a source of grounding and stability, have taken on the personalities of disappointed coworkers. You sigh not loudly, just enough to remind your lungs that you're still participating. The sergeant, a man whose tone suggests he hasn't enjoyed a proper bowel movement since the start of the war, bellows once more about latrine duty. This time, your name is attached. There is no ceremony in latrine duty, no song, no badge of honor, just a wooden shovel, a pair of gloves that seem to have absorbed every odor available in northern France, and a quiet resignation. You shuffle toward the designated trench within a trench where yesterday's assignments are now softly steaming, covered in a layer of straw that fails at both camouflage and olfactory deception. The process is simple, which doesn't mean it's quick. Dig, shift, sprinkle, repeat. You fall into a rhythm something between penance and agricultural misadventure, pausing only when your spine complains, or when a gust of wind delivers a particularly vivid memory to your nose. Somewhere nearby, Private Tinsley is humming tunelessly. It is not helpful. He's on rat patrol, which means he carries a long stick and an even longer list of grudges. Rat Patrol is not an official title, but he has taken it upon himself to monitor the rodent population with the zeal of a man who once lost a sandwich and never recovered emotionally. Tinsley claims to recognize individual rats. He's named them. There's a large one he calls Inspector Gregory, who he believes is spying for the Germans. Another, smaller and more limber, is simply called Soup. You don't ask why. It's best not to dig too deeply into Tinsley's taxonomy. While you shovel, Soup makes an appearance near the base of the sandbags, darts into a gap, and disappears. Tinsley lunges, misses, swears in iambic pentameter. You return to your task. The smell, it should be noted, is not a consistent one. It evolves. At first, it is simply offensive. Then, it becomes a presence, a character in its own right, with arcs and moods. By the end of the hour, it has matured into something almost philosophical, asking questions about the nature of existence and the permanence of the human condition. You try not to answer. When the job is done, though, one could argue it's never truly done. You rinse the shovel in a water barrel that seems to resent its own purpose, and you hang the gloves on a peg next to a note that reads, "Do not touch," even on a dare. You wipe your hands on your trousers, which are already home to at least 3 other stains of mysterious origin. Somewhere up the line, a whistle blows. Not the kind that precedes disaster, just the kind that implies attention. Mail again. Unlikely. Soup's revenge. Possible. You glance at the horizon, still not visible, and then back at your section, where men are now gathering around a small fire that someone has coaxed into reluctant existence using bits of splintered crate and optimism. You make your way there slowly, noting that the socks have now begun to resemble damp noodles and may need to be reclassified. The fire is not warm. It is suggestive of warmth. It emits heat the way old men emit advice sporadically and with more smoke than necessary. Corporal Dunley is stirring something in a tin pot. It may be stew. It may be the concept of stew interpreted through the medium of root vegetables and apology. He says nothing, but gestures toward the pot with the ladle. You accept a scoop, which lands in your mess tin, with a noise that suggests it is not ready for consumption, but will allow itself to be eaten if no better options present. You sit on the edge of the fire step, wrap your hands around the tin, and inhale the scent. Onion, potato, possibly beet, and something else, something emotional. It's not a flavor so much as a memory of food. You eat it slowly, not to savor it, but because your mouth needs time to negotiate texture with your brain. Tinsley joins you, muttering about Soup's escape and the state of his morale. He thinks the rats are multiplying, breeding in the dugouts, planning something. You nod. You've seen the glint in Soup's eyes. He's not wrong. Behind you, someone begins singing an old marching tune, off-key, but with conviction. Others join in, not in harmony, but in solidarity. It's not pretty, but it is loud enough to drown out the silence, which has grown increasingly philosophical since the stew was served. The harmonica man joins in. The key is uncertain, but the intent is clear. Survive until the next hour, maybe the one after that. You finish your stew, scrape the last bit from the bottom with a piece of biscuit that crumbles under the pressure. A soft rain begins to fall, as if summoned by boredom. You don't bother moving. No one does. Rain is not an event. It is a condition, like age or trench foot. You pull your coat tighter, shift slightly, and notice your socks have vanished. Alfred and Alfred II remain, but the socks are gone. Tinsley suggests soup. You suspect he's right. You sigh, not loudly, just enough to acknowledge the pattern. Another shovel clinks against the latrine wall. Another whistle sounds. Another day forgets to end. And above you, the sky continues to hold its breath, waiting for something less predictable than. It's the kind of rain that seems less like weather and more like a minor inconvenience sent by the universe to keep expectations low. Not heavy enough to justify retreating into the dugout, but persistent enough to make sure nothing, including your mood, ever truly dries. You sit beside the remains of the fire, which has now given up entirely, steaming itself into a puddle of ash and charcoal regret. Tinsley is still grumbling about soup, though the tone has softened. He speaks now of a truce, possibly a pact, but you suspect it's mostly the stew talking. The missing socks are mourned with the quiet solemnity normally reserved for old pets or childhood toys. Alfred and Alfred II remain motionless, damp with both rain and implied betrayal. You contemplate standing, but your body disagrees. Instead, you slide slightly into the crook of the trench wall, just enough to redistribute your discomfort evenly across both hips. The harmonica has stopped. Either the player has fallen asleep or reached a point of existential harmony where sound is no longer required. For a few minutes, no one speaks. Even Tinsley goes quiet, eyes drifting to the shape of clouds that don't move but seem to press down like an overfilled blanket. The mud thickens. It accepts new footprints with a resigned squish. Your hands, though tucked in your sleeves, feel slick. Your coat, having absorbed both rain and trench aroma over the past few weeks, now smells like determination and old onions. The sergeant appears suddenly, his boots squelching with authority, and announces that an inspection may be imminent. No one asks when. No one asks why. Everyone simply begins the quiet ritual of pretending they have things under control. Helmets are straightened. Coats are brushed, though it only relocates the mud. One man polishes his buttons with a rag that may once have been part of someone's undergarments. It doesn't help, but he does it anyway, because that's what you do. You polish. You prepare. You wait. The idea of inspection floats through the trench like a rumor that doesn't quite believe in itself. Some rearrange crates. Others repack bags. You relocate your remaining sock, a crusty, half-dry relic found wedged behind a crate of tinned meat, and try to fold it in a way that suggests cleanliness. It doesn't work. The sock resists authority. The minutes pass. The sergeant disappears, presumably, to warn other sections or to find a dry cigarette and the illusion of control. The rain lightens, which feels suspicious. The clouds linger. The inspection never arrives. Eventually, one by one, the men abandon their half-hearted preparations and resume their previous positions, sitting smoking or staring. You drift toward the dugout, not out of purpose, but because your knees have begun to make decisions without you. Inside, the air is damp, heavy with body heat, mildew, and the subtle tang of rusting tools. It's dim. A lantern hangs near the ceiling, its light filtered through. Grime casting shadows that move slightly, as if uncertain of their own shapes. A narrow bench runs along one wall, partly covered in a blanket that smells faintly of old tea, and whatever sadness lingers in unwashed wool. You sit. The wood creaks. It always creaks. It's a sound you've come to know well, less a protest than a cry of familiarity. You remove your boots. One is still harboring a small pebble. You place it beside the bench, naming it quietly, Alfred III, and line it up with the others. Your feet, pale and wrinkled, throb with relief. You tuck them under the blanket, which barely covers your ankles, but offers the suggestion of comfort. Tinsley appears in the doorway. He says nothing, just nods, then curls up on the opposite end of the bench, facing the wall, like a man trying to forget his own origin story. The lantern flickers. Someone coughs outside. The trench settles. And slowly, against the odds, sleep approaches. Not full sleep. Not the luxurious, dream-filled slumber of a feather bed and warm milk. This is trench sleep. Shallow, restless. It arrives in segments. A nod here, a drifting thought there, a sudden jolt as your body remembers where it is. You drift briefly into a memory, not a clear one. A kitchen, maybe. A kettle. The sound of butter sizzling on a pan. You don't see faces, just impressions. Warmth, wood floors, the sound of rain against a window that didn't leak. You try to hold on to it, but something changes. A sound outside, sharp. Not gunfire, not yet, but something metallic. A scrape, a shout, then boots, heavy, urgent, a call. You open your eyes. Tinsley is already upright. The dugout is darker now. The lantern has gone out. The bench is cold. You reach for your boots. The pebble rolls away. Alfred III is gone. Outside the trench is stirring. You fumble your boots on in the half-dark, the heel of one catching on a crust of dried mud that might once have been part of a turnip. The other boot swallows your foot with a slow, wet sigh, as if reluctant to get back to work. Tinsley is already outside, crouched just beyond the dugout entrance, peering down the trench, like a man expecting both answers and disappointment. You shuffle out behind him, careful not to step on Alfred III, though it no longer matters. He's vanished into the mud, like so many small ambitions. The air is sharp, cooler than before, and carries the distinct tang of metal mixed with something more abstract, like the idea of danger that hasn't fully arrived yet. There's a hush over the trench now, not silent, but muffled, the way sound behaves when even noise has second thoughts. Men are stirring, emerging from dugouts and corners, some blinking, some muttering, one still buttoning his coat with the urgency of someone who never found all his buttons to begin with. A corporal down the line shouts something vague, "Move up," or possibly "mules up," but either way, a shuffling procession begins, boots scraping duckboards, rifles slung with the casual carelessness of routine. You follow because that's what you do. You don't ask. You don't need to know. You move because movement is easier than wondering. The sky has shifted colors again, not brighter, not darker, just different, like it's trying on new shades of gray in a mirror that never compliments. Around the bend in the trench, you spot the source of the metallic clatter. A cookpot has fallen from its hook near the field kitchen and rolled into a puddle where it now floats like a lost canoe. No emergency, no drill, just gravity and poor planning. The men pause briefly to glare at it, as if expecting an apology. None comes. The sergeant, arriving breathless and underwhelmed, grunts that there'll be a stand down. Inspections canceled, possibly relocated, possibly invented. No one reacts. Tinsley mutters that he knew it. He says soup wouldn't stand for surprise inspections. You nod mostly because the alternative is engaging. With nothing more to do, the group slowly disperses, each man peeling off in a different direction, back toward their posts, crates, or the occasional barrel that offers the illusion of privacy. You drift back toward the mess line, where a kettle hisses like an old librarian, and something vaguely food-shaped, is being sliced with a knife, too blunt to threaten anything but dignity. It's bread. Or at least a brick that once aspired to be bread, now sliced into narrow slabs and handed out with the reverence usually reserved for antique cheese. You accept yours with a nod. The crust cracks like tired knuckles. The center is dense heavy and carries the faint warmth of something that sat near fire without being directly involved. You chew, slowly, carefully. The bread tastes of flour, age, and the memory of yeast. Still, it's better than stew. Probably. A man beside you claims his slice has a raisin in it. This sparks a brief debate about the definition of raisins and whether pebbles soaked in broth count. Consensus is not reached. You chew on eyes scanning the trench without urgency. A few men play cards on a ration crate, the deck-worn thin edges curled like overcooked bacon. One card is missing. They've substituted it with a scrap of newspaper that simply reads, "Minister resigns, now representing the Queen of Clubs." Another man, hunched on a stool of dubious origin, is writing a letter, tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth as if to steady the words. The pencil stub he uses is held like a precious relic. You finish your bread and tuck the last dry corner into your pocket, unsure if you're saving it for later or just too tired to finish. The wind picks up. It carries a whiff of something sweet and wrong gas, perhaps, though distant, a warning, rather than an event. You watch the others for signs. No one reacts. One man sneezes into his sleeve and mutters something about hay fever. Tinsley has begun fashioning a chessboard into the dirt with the butt of his rifle, using pebbles and crumbs as pieces. He insists the game will be against the rat. Soup, presumably. You watch as he carefully nudges a crumb into what he calls king's pawn position. It begins to rain again. Lightly, relentlessly. The trench drinks it in mud, bubbling like weak tea walls, glistening with rivulets of doubt. Your feet dry for nearly 40 minutes, begin to regret their optimism. Someone starts singing again, a different song this time, something slow and tuneless, more hum than hymn. The melody floats, loses direction, and settles into the drizzle. A corporal passes by with a ledger, stops, and squints at the chess game, says nothing, keeps walking. The match begins. The rat does not appear, but Tinsley moves both sides anyway, narrating softly as though to an audience that never asked for tickets. You sit down beside him, not to play, not even to watch, but because sitting feels slightly less impossible than standing. You consider offering advice, but the game appears to be guided by rules that shift between turns. One of the pawns has been eaten. It's unclear by whom. You settle in coat pulled tighter, head bowed slightly, not sleeping, not really awake, just here. The board tilts. The rain falls. The trench waits. And in the distance, a whistle blows again this time. The whistle pierces the ambient lull like a teacher tapping a chalkboard, just when the classroom had settled into productive daydreaming. And though it's distant and faint, the sound rolls through the trench in a way that rearranges shoulders, stiffens spines, and makes everyone, including the chess-playing rat enthusiasts, glance up without quite looking at one another. Tinsley's crumb pawn, halfway through a bold flanking maneuver, topples with a wet plop as the drizzle intensifies into a gentle but confident patter that begins to form small rivulets along the duckboards, turning every step into a thoughtful wager between forward motion and probable slipping. You rise slowly, not so much out of urgency, but because the whistle, for all its vagueness, is one of those sounds that insists on being acknowledged, like a knock at a door you didn't expect, but can't entirely ignore. Around you, the men begin to shift. Some stand, others lean. A few glance down the line as if hoping someone else might confirm the meaning of the call. The sergeant reappears, soaked and glistening, like a boiled ham, mumbling something that might be orders, or might just be his own internal monologue, made audible by dampness and despair. He gestures with a vague sweep of his hand, and everyone begins to move in the general direction of the south trench, bend a corner of the line known primarily for being slightly less muddy and slightly more prone to surprise inspections that never actually happen. You follow the group, your boots making a lazy, squelching rhythm that blends nicely with the background symphony of murmurs, rain, and the occasional bark from the corporal, whose sole contribution to morale is volume. As you round the bend, you see the source of the whistle, a young lieutenant recently arrived, with boots too clean and eyes that haven't yet learned the art of staring at nothing with purpose. He holds a clipboard like it might bite him and frowns at it between announcements that are technically words, but mostly function as punctuation between silences. There's a gathering now, loose and soggy, half-formed, like a line for soup or salvation. The lieutenant informs you all, after a moment's consultation with the damp pages of his clipboard, that there will be a kit check, just a small one, just to keep things sharp. You watch the men react, not with panic, not even frustration, just a sort of weary compliance, the way a farmer might regard a sudden frost unhelpful, yes, but not surprising. One by one, packs are opened. Items are removed, examined, held up for inspection. A mess tin with a dent shaped like Belgium. A bayonet wiped clean on a shirt that now carries the stain as a badge of mediocrity. A sewing kit missing its needle, but containing 3 buttons, 2 of which are definitely from someone else's coat. When it's your turn, you kneel in the mud and unbuckle your satchel. It sticks, as if reluctant to reveal its contents, but finally surrenders to your insistence and flops open with a noise like an exhausted sigh. You lay the contents out carefully. 1 tin of biscuits, unopened, but swelling slightly from moisture. 1 pair of socks, mismatched and resigned. 1 half bar of soap, wrapped in a paper that used to be white. A journal you haven't written in since the last time something happened worth remembering. And a small, folded note. The ink faded the paper crisp from folding, which you don't open, but place gently to the side, as if afraid it might be counted as contraband. The lieutenant looks at your things, nods once, then hesitates. He reaches for your coat, frowns, and asks about your buttons. You look down. The second from the top is missing, and you hadn't noticed. He marks something on his clipboard. Not a reprimand, just a note. A missing button. It joins the ledger of petty absences that mark your time here. The other sock, the proper spoon, your sense of days. You promise yourself you'll replace it later. You won't. The check continues. No one fails, not really. Just a collection of minor failings, noted and then moved on from, like dust swept under a carpet that's already covered in footprints. The group disperses again. Now, looser the cohesion of the moment, giving way to personal, gravitational pulls toward dry crates, half-burned cigarettes, or the spot behind the latrine that smells slightly less bad since someone planted a sprig of mint that may or may not be growing. You wander toward your post, a stretch of trench wall, held up by stubbornness and a few good intentions, and settle on the crate that serves as both chair and occasional table. The rain slows, but the trench stays wet, holding moisture the way some people hold grudges. You notice your collar is fraying, the fabric softening into threads that curl upward like tiny white flags. Across the trench, the harmonica player tunes a note, holds it, then stops as if the trench itself changed keys. Tinsley returns, clutching a button he claims he found near the latrine. Not yours, he says, but one with potential. He places it on the crate between you, like an offering or a conversation starter. You both stare at it. Small, round, nondescript. Just a button. But not the one you lost. You wonder briefly how many buttons have been shed along this trench, how many small pieces of fabric history are buried beneath the mud, pressed flat by time and boots and forgetfulness. The wind picks up again, not sharp, just persistent, the way a thought returns when you hoped it wouldn't. You reach into your coat pocket, feel the corner of the letter, and leave it there. Across the trench, someone mutters about another inspection. Maybe tomorrow, maybe never. You watch the button on the crate wobble slightly in the wind, then fall still again as the sky thickens once more, and the first dull rumble rolls across the horizon from somewhere too far to matter, but close enough to notice. The rumble fades as slowly as it arrived, dragging itself across the sky like a tired dog, looking for some place dry to lie down. And for a long while, after the sound disappears, no one says anything, as if acknowledging it might make it more real, or more relevant, or simply more work. The button on the crate remains where Tinsley left it, small and still and perfectly circular, a neutral party in the day's events, not claiming ownership or purpose, just existing in quiet defiance of classification. You don't pick it up. You just look at it the way you'd look at a pebble that rolled unexpectedly into your shoe, a thing too small to matter and too persistent to ignore. The trench has returned to its usual rhythm, that slow shuffle of activity, where everything feels slightly too late or slightly too early, but never quite on time. Men drift past, not in any particular direction, just from one place to another, like laundry left to dry in the wind, and occasionally caught by it. The ground squishes beneath every step. The walls lean inward, just enough to remind you of weight. Overhead, the sky has abandoned the pretense of variety, and now wears its colorless expanse with the confidence of a curtain drawn across a window you no longer care to look through. You sit with your back against the trench wall, your coat pulled up around your neck, the missing button more noticeable now that you've acknowledged it. The letter in your pocket shifts slightly as you move the edge, brushing against your chest, not enough to read, just enough to remember. It's not even the newest letter, just the one you haven't had the energy to fold back up properly. Tinsley is carving something into a piece of wood with a dull pocket knife, and though you don't ask what it is, he offers the answer. Anyway, it's a whistle. He says not to be blown, but to be carried for emergencies or memories or both. You nod, which is enough for him. Across the trench, there's a commotion near the cook tent, which is less of a tent and more of a sagging lean-to supported by a pot-belly stove and the weight of unmet expectations. The smell wafts unevenly, a mixture of boiled grain, damp onion, and hope gone soggy around the edges. Someone says, "Supper's ready." No one rushes. Supper is not an event. Supper is a transition, a small pause between today and whatever happens after the sky darkens enough to pretend it's night. Eventually, you rise your knees, registering mild protest as they straighten. The crate gives a damp sigh as you shift off of it. The button stays behind. You don't say goodbye. The cook tonight is Dunley, as usual, and his ladle moves through the pot like he's stirring regret into every serving. He doesn't make eye contact as he spoons something grayish into your tin. It's thicker than yesterday's, and smells vaguely of something root-based and slightly fermented. You thank him out of habit. He grunts something that might be acknowledgement or indigestion. You find a place on a low board beside a slouched sandbag that looks ready to retire. Tinsley joins you a moment later, his own tin sloshing gently as he walks. He sits without ceremony and begins to eat slowly, chewing with the resigned patience of someone who knows speed will not improve the experience. You take your first bite. It's not bad, not good, but not bad. It fills your mouth and doesn't actively fight you. That's enough. Around you, other men eat in similar silence. A few mutter about the day. One insists the sound earlier wasn't thunder, but artillery from a far-off skirmish. Another says it might have just been a cart tipping over behind the medical tent. No one argues. All theories are equally unsatisfying and therefore equally likely. You finish half your meal before realizing you're not hungry. You put the tin aside. Not far, just enough that it's not the main thing anymore. Your fingers curl around the edges of the bench. A drop of rain finds the back of your neck and slides down like an uninvited thought. Somewhere nearby, someone hums a tune, and slow. Something that might be from home, or might just sound like it is. Tinsley asks if you ever think about how long the trench is not just in miles, but in lives. You nod. That feels true. You try to picture it stretching out across the fields, a line of mud and men and misplaced intentions. You imagine a map, but the map turns blank after a few feet, not from lack of imagination, but from too much of it. You lean back slightly, eyes tracing the curve of the trench wall. There's moss growing in one corner, green, stubborn. It didn't ask to be here. It simply is. Someone across the way curses softly. A rat, maybe, or a dropped spoon. The harmonica makes a short, uncertain sound and then stops again. The sky presses down a little harder. You wipe your hand on your coat, leave a new streak where there was already a stain. The rest of the men begin to stand drifting away from the food, back to their posts, or their seats, or their thoughts. Tinsley remains for a moment, staring into his tin, like it might offer a second opinion. Then he rises too. You both walk back toward the bend in the trench, not talking, not needing to. The button is still on the crate. You pause beside it. Consider it. Then pick it up and slip it into your pocket, where it settles next to the folded letter and a pebble you forgot was there. Overhead, the wind shifts again, carrying a new scent, burnt oil, maybe, or smoke. Tinsley sniffs and says nothing. You keep walking. Past the post where the sandbags sag, past the gap where someone once carved their name into the wood, and then stopped halfway through. The light begins to fade, not quickly, just subtly, the way a candle dims, before remembering it was never lit. Behind you, the sound of a shovel, dragging boots, slipping voices, quieting. Ahead, a lantern flickers on. The lantern hangs from a crooked nail, hammered into a beam that leans slightly to the left, as if trying to escape its own responsibility. And the light it casts is not so much bright as it is committed a dull orange glow that doesn't so much push back the dark as agree to coexist with it. You and Tinsley approach it slowly, boots making the soft, wet sounds that only and resignation can produce. And for a brief moment, the trench looks almost cozy, like a cave someone once tried to decorate and then gave up halfway through. The air around the lantern feels marginally warmer, not from heat exactly, but from familiarity, like how the corner of a worn blanket holds the idea of comfort, even if it's cold to the touch. The post here is one of the quieter ones, halfway between the cook tent and the edge of the line, and for reasons no one really understands, the rats don't seem to like it much. That makes it ideal for night watch duty, though it also means you're more likely to be assigned there when the rest of the trench is sleeping badly and pretending not to. The corporal is already there, scratching something into a small notebook with a pencil that's less than 2 inches long and worn smooth with use. He doesn't look up as you approach, just mutters something about time and tilts his head toward the logbook sitting on the crate beside him. Tinsley signs in with a flourish, even though his signature is barely legible anymore, then steps aside and lets you do the same. Your handwriting, slow and careful, betrays how long it's been since you wrote anything more significant than your name. The corporal finally looks up and hands you a pocket watch, the chain worn, the casing scratched the glass, cracked near the edge where someone once dropped it, and then tried to pretend they hadn't. It's not set to real time, not even close. It keeps trench time, which is something between guesswork and folklore, and you've long since learned not to argue with it. He tells you it's a quiet night. You nod, as if that means anything. Quiet is just a placeholder for what hasn't happened yet. Tinsley takes first watch. You sit beside him on a box that was once full of rations and now smells like it's absorbed every meal it ever carried. The trench wall beside you is marked with faint lines, days or weeks or weather patterns. It's never been clear, and a cigarette stub is wedged into a knot in the wood like someone tried to quit smoking mid-panic and then forgot. You lean your rifle against the wall, barrel pointed just so, not out of habit, but from the quiet understanding that routine is the only thing holding most of you together. The lantern swings slightly in the breeze, creaking on its nail, casting long shadows that stretch and pull with every movement. Tinsley hums under his breath again, a tune without words or notes, just a low vibration that reminds you of bees or lullabies. He stops after a minute. Not abruptly, just gently fades out. Somewhere down the line, a cough breaks the silence. Not close, not alarming, just a reminder that someone else is still awake. You pull your coat tighter, the missing button making itself known again, a small draft finding its way under the wool and settling against your ribs like a judgmental spoon. You think about the button in your pocket, the one Tinsley found, and for a moment you consider sewing it on, but that would mean finding your kit, finding the needle, threading it in this light. You don't move. Across from you, the wall of the trench has been etched with initials, dozens of them, some deep, some just scratches, names reduced to letters. FHRT. A heart carved around ME that has long since cracked. You wonder who carved them, whether they stayed long, whether they still remember doing it. Tinsley shifts on the crate, says it's colder tonight. You agree, though it might just be that the damp has moved in deeper than usual, like a house guest who used to be charming, but now won't leave. The corporal returns once to check in, nods at you both, then disappears back into the dark like a figure in a dream you weren't supposed to remember. The minutes pass slowly. You can hear the faint sound of water dripping somewhere, a slow, steady beat that matches the rhythm of your thoughts. You pull out the letter from your pocket, not to read it, just to unfold it, to feel the paper, to remember the act of unfolding. The words are still there, familiar and worn. You know them by heart now, but you trace a line with your finger, anyway, as if touching the ink might bring something closer. It doesn't. Tinsley stands, stretches, and hands you the watch. His shift is over. Yours has begun. He yawns, salutes with 2 fingers in a mock gesture, and ambles off toward the dugout, his boots making that side rhythm again. You take his place on the crate, hold the watch in your palm, feel its slow ticking. The lantern sputters once, but recovers. You glance down the trench, past the bend, toward the edge where the shadows thicken. The quiet holds steady and stubborn. You listen for sounds that aren't there, for footsteps, whispers, or the faint scratch of something moving where it shouldn't be. But there's only the breeze, the dripping, and the watch ticking on as the light begins to shift once more. The crate beneath you groans again as your weight shifts. Not in protest, really more in the way old wood offers commentary, and your fingers close gently around the cracked casing of the watch. It's ticking the closest thing you have to a metronome out here, where time stretches and yawns, and sometimes folds in on itself entirely. The lantern's flame flutters not from wind so much as uncertainty, casting a jittery golden hue over your boots, the logbook, and the patch of earth in front of you, where someone once dropped half a biscuit that now resembles a fossilized animal of unknown species. Your rifle rests within reach. Its shape, a familiar presence, even in the dark, the way your own shadow might feel if it were made of cold steel and obligation. The trench around you breathes in that way quiet places do when people pretend they're alone in them, and you settle in, shoulders hunched slightly, watching nothing in particular. At some point, the lantern swings a little more than usual and casts light onto a stretch of wall you hadn't noticed before, an old faded map tacked there with bent nails and wear. The map doesn't show much. Some lines, a few X's initials, that could mean anything or nothing, and a tear in the paper that travels right through what was probably the most important part. You stare at it anyway. Sometimes maps don't tell you where to go, so much as remind you that you're already where someone thought you should be. A soft rustle behind you makes your neck stiffen, just slightly, until it's followed by a low mutter and the sound of someone adjusting their coat. Just another soldier changing shifts or dreaming loudly, or both. You breathe out slow and even. Your hands are beginning to feel the cold now, fingertips tingling. Not from pain, but from that dull, whispering numbness that suggests you should do something, but doesn't offer suggestions. You flex them gently. In your left pocket, The letter crinkles a dry, delicate sound, like autumn leaves you'd forgotten underfoot. The button rests in your right, smooth and uncommitted, a small piece of the world that hasn't yet chosen a purpose. Further down the trench, a low voice calls out just once, a name maybe, or a warning. It isn't repeated. You scan the line. Nothing moves. The mud glistens where the lantern's reach fades, and beyond that is only darkness, thick and soft and full of maybe. You rise, stretch your legs, and walk a few paces to the left, careful not to disturb the puddles that have formed along the center of the duckboard path. There's a spool of wire near the corner, left behind by the engineers, its edges rusted and tangled like a bad haircut. You crouch beside it, running a finger along the curve, not to fix it, just to feel something solid. The wire hums, faintly catching wind, like a string might catch a tune. And for a moment, it sounds like music. You imagine pulling it taut, sending a message through the taut vibrations, still here, still watching, still pretending this all makes sense. But the wire says nothing back. It never does. You return to your post. The watch ticks on. You check the face 3 hours since Tinsley handed it off, give or take whatever errors have accumulated since it last saw a proper reset. You blink. The lantern flickers again, then steadies. The light is beginning to shift, not from the flame, but from the sky beyond the trench. A faint lightness creeps in, not quite color, just less darkness. The sort of pale suggestion that maybe, possibly, eventually, the sun could rise again. The moment before dawn here feels longer than the rest of the day, combined, like the world is holding its breath, unsure whether it wants to commit. You stare up the clouds, still thick, but thinning at the edges, like someone scraped them with the back of a spoon. You close your eyes for a second. Just one, maybe two, long enough for the sound of the watch to sink deeper into your mind, a tick for each second that hasn't demanded anything from you. When you open them again, nothing has changed. That in itself feels like a kind of miracle. You reach into your coat, touch the paper of the letter again, then pull it out slowly, unfold it in the half-light. The words are still there, faint, but steady. A note from someone who thinks you'll come back, or at least wants you to believe you might. You read the line about the dog chasing the laundry again. You smile, but your mouth doesn't quite get the message. A small sound to your right, like gravel shifting, brings your head up. Just another man adjusting in his sleep. No alarm, no danger. Just a world that keeps shifting its weight, trying to get comfortable. You check the watch again. Nearly time to wake the next shift. You hesitate, savoring the quiet, the strange peace of this half-lit hour, when nothing is asked and nothing is given. Then behind you, footsteps approach. The footsteps are deliberate, but not hurried, the kind of pace that suggests a man used to finding his way in the dark without waking others, or knocking over lanterns. And you glance over your shoulder just as Miller emerges from the bend in the trench, rubbing his eyes with one hand and clutching his coat tighter with the other. He gives you a nod, not quite a greeting, more of an acknowledgement that both of you still exist, which in the trenches sometimes passes for conversation. You nod back, offer the pocket watch without ceremony, and he takes it without comment, slipping it into his breast pocket with a practiced movement, like a priest stowing a sacred relic, even though the watch is 2 minutes slow and 10 years past its prime. He settles onto the crate, adjusts the lantern just slightly more out of habit than need, and then reaches into his coat for what he calls breakfast, but what is in reality the same biscuit ration from 2 days ago, now stiffer than optimism and about as flavorful. You step aside, letting the rhythm of his routine replace yours. There is something comforting in that handover, as if by watching someone else sit in the same place, hold the same rifle, breathe the same air. You can convince yourself that time is moving forward. You stretch your arms overhead, joints cracking like wet firewood, and glance once more at the sky. It has turned the color of dishwater, left too long in the sink, a pale, uncertain gray that doesn't yet qualify as morning, but no longer passes for night. The clouds remain stubbornly unbroken, a solid ceiling, pressing down just enough to remind you that whatever is beyond them doesn't particularly care. Behind you, Miller starts humming low and tuneless, the way men do when there's nothing left to say and no one left to impress. You consider heading back to the dugout, but instead, you follow the trench a few steps east toward the short section, where the wall is reinforced with scavenged timber and one old cupboard door someone had carried all the way from a ruined farmhouse because it looked useful. The door, now covered in names and initials, and one poorly drawn cat marks the halfway point between your end of the line and the next post, and no one can quite remember who brought it or why, but it remains like a relic, stubborn and slightly warped. You touch it as you pass more out of superstition than respect, then make your way to the cook station, where the fire has long since gone out, but the scent of scorched oats lingers like an overcooked ghost. Corporal Dunley is there, of course, squatting beside a pile of tin mess kits and mumbling under his breath as he chips dried porridge from the rim of one particularly battered pot. He doesn't acknowledge you as you approach, but after a moment, he gestures with his chin toward a crate where a new stack of bread bricks waits slightly less stale than the last batch, and still wrapped in their brown wax paper like forgotten gifts. You take one, peel back the edges, and take a bite. The taste is neutral, not unpleasant, just there, like warm water or polite conversation. You chew slowly, listening to the morning noises beginning to rise, a few clanks of gear being shifted, the soft curses of someone trying to lace damp boots, the unmistakable hiss of someone realizing too late that they've sat in something. The trench is waking up. Not quickly, not cheerfully, but inevitably. You finish the bread, wipe your hands on your coat, and start back toward your section, where Tinsley has taken your place on the bench and appears to be rearranging stones into a rough square around what might be a puddle or might be an experimental footbath. He nods as you approach and points with his chin toward the horizon, where the clouds are beginning to lift just enough to hint at the rising sun. It's not beautiful, but it's different. And different in the trench counts for a lot. The light spills slowly over the edge of the land, revealing more mud, more wire, more low silhouettes of distant structures that might once have been barns or chapels, or simply the memory of shelter. You watch the sky shift, and in that moment, something moves, not in the trench, but above it. A shape, a blot against the dim light. For a second, it looks like a bird, but birds rarely fly here anymore. Not this low, not this slow. You squint. Tinsley squints. The shape banks slightly, gliding across the sky without sound. Then it's gone, slipping behind a rise of cloud or a curl of smoke. You wait. No noise, no engine, just silence. You glance at Tinsley. He shrugs the universal language of men too tired to interpret omens. Maybe it was a bird. Maybe it was something else. You walk back to the crate. The button is still there. No, not the button. A different one. Slightly larger. Different shade. You pick it up, turn it over in your hand. There's something scratched into the back, a single initial worn and hard to read. Maybe a J or a 5. You don't know. You pocket it anyway. Behind you, the harmonica plays a few notes, tentative and slow, like it's trying to remember a tune it only half learned. The trench stirs again, and you turn toward the dugout where someone is calling your name. You turn toward the voice, still holding the second button, its scratched surface warm now from your palm. And there at the dugout entrance is Feller, his frame slouched in the usual way. Men in the trench learn to carry themselves half braced against gravity, half in defiance of it. He waves you over, not urgently, but with enough emphasis to suggest some measure of mild interest or recent confusion. As you approach, he ducks back into the dugout, which smells, as always, of boots, oilcloth, and the permanent suggestion of mildew. You crouch to enter, brushing past the heavy blanket that hangs for warmth or illusion, or both, and inside the light is dim, though someone has set a candle on an overturned tin. It flickers just enough to remind you it exists. Feller is sitting cross-legged near the rear wall, sorting through a collection of tins, paper scraps, and what appears to be a frayed sock filled with broken crayons. He doesn't look up as he speaks, just says, "They're saying a shift's coming," then pauses to inspect a dented tin of what may once have been preserved beef. From above, higher-ups, I mean, talking about a rotation. You blink at him, not sure if it's worth reacting. Rumors about rotations come through every 10 days or so sometimes, from a man who heard it from a corporal, sometimes from a pigeon with a nervous tick. They always follow the same arc, hope, skepticism, vague excitement, slow disappointment. Feller shrugs, says he heard it from Jennings, who got it from the supply corporal, who only drinks when he's lying, which by trench math makes it about 50-50. You nod and sit across from him on a crate someone once tried to use as a chair before realizing it was nailed shut. Feller opens another tin, sniffs. It makes a face, then sets it aside. "Don't think this one survived the trip," he mutters, as if it had fought a war of its own and lost. He finally looks up, notices the button in your hand, and gestures toward it. "That from the cook's coat." You shrug. "Found it by the crate." He nods thoughtfully. "Not mine. Too clean." You agree silently. This one's not like the rest you've found smooth light, a shade too polished for trench life. You set it next to the letter on the crate, its presence now quietly acknowledged, but not yet explained. A few moments pass in which neither of you speaks. The candle flickers again. Somewhere above, someone drops something with a clatter, followed by the briefest string of creative curses. Feller leans back, pulls a scrap of bread from his coat, breaks it in half, and hands you the slightly larger piece, as if that balances things. You accept it, chew slowly, and say nothing. There's a kind of comfort in shared rations, even when they're dry and tasteless. a moment of mutual agreement that things may be grim, but at least they're shared. Feller starts humming under his breath. An old tune, the kind you might hear from a grandmother, or in the back room of a bar, with more ghosts than patrons. You recognize it. Not the name, but the feeling. It's the sound of waiting. You stare down at the letter again, the crease now worn smooth from being opened, folded, refolded, and carried through rain sweat and one unfortunate stew incident. You haven't replied. Not once. You've thought about it. You've even composed sentences in your head, once while digging a latrine, once while watching a rat carry off a piece of biscuit larger than its head. But the paper always stays blank. Feller shifts suddenly, reaches into a tin, and pulls out a small, dark square wrapped in wax paper. "Chocolate," he says, as if announcing the second coming. You blink. From where he smirks. Swap. Gave up a whole tin of sardines and 3 matches for it. Might have been overpaying. He unwraps it, reverently, breaks it in half carefully. This time, no guessing, and offers you a piece. It tastes like dust and dreams with the faintest hint of something sweet that might just be memory. You nod. Worth it. He nods too. Thought so. You sit in silence for a bit longer, chewing slowly, listening to the subtle creaks of the dugout as the trench wakes up properly. Now voices, rising gear, clinking. The sound of someone somewhere practicing a joke that no one will find funny until 2 days later, when it's told again. You rise, patting your pocket, and feel both buttons, now the old one and the new. You consider sewing them onto your coat, not together, just one. The other. Maybe it belongs somewhere else. Maybe it's just a thing to carry. Feller's already distracted again, poking at the mysterious contents of a pouch labeled medical that seems to contain mostly string and gauze that's seen better decades. You step out into the trench, the air brisk, the sky slightly lighter than it had been, though not by much. The mud hasn't improved. You head toward the water station to rinse your hands. Not that it'll do much. The trench moves around you now, men shifting, preparing, digging, talking. A buzz of anticipation, the kind that comes not from news, but from the possibility of news. You feel it in your shoulders, the tension of almost. And as you pass the bend in the trench where the sandbags lean like old men in conversation, someone calls out from the forward line. Your name again, this time sharper. The voice carries over the slanted trench wall with the kind of urgency that doesn't shout, but still expects an answer. And you quicken your pace, careful not to trip where the boards have warped and split just enough to snag a boot or a toe or an already tenuous mood. You round the bend, nod at a pair of sappers discussing whether sandbags age faster than people, and make your way to the narrow junction where the forward line begins its planks darker from use, its walls tighter, the air itself somehow thinner, as though anticipation takes up more space than oxygen. The corporal who called you is leaning against the wooden support post with a stance halfway between casual and constipated. His name might be Lorne, or maybe Lorber. You've never been sure, and by now it feels impolite to ask. He gestures behind him with a thumb. They need a runner, he says, voice low and flat, like he's describing a mediocre dinner. Message to Post 5. Just a short one. Take your time, but don't be late. He hands you a folded slip of paper, already damp around the edges from trench humidity. You tuck it inside your coat, just above the button in your pocket, and nod. He doesn't wait for a reply, already turning to answer someone shouting about jam tins and who last borrowed the spade. The path to Post 5 isn't long, technically, just a series of connected trench angles marked by half-collapsed signage and a trail of boot marks so well-worn they seem fossilized, but it still feels like a journey. You adjust your coat check, your footing, and begin. The mud here is deeper somehow, thicker, not wetter exactly, but more confident in its ability to resist progress. Every step sinks just enough to demand attention. Around the first bend, you pass a sentry post, the soldier there nodding absently without making eye contact, too busy watching the sky or the wire or his own thoughts. The second bend brings you past a stack of crates that used to hold ammunition, but now serve as a makeshift bench and unofficially a post for rumors. Someone once carved the word promotion into the top crate, then scratched it out and wrote potatoes instead. You keep walking. There's a faint sound from ahead. Low conversation, not urgent, not loud. You come into view of Post 5 just as the clouds shift above, letting a single ray of pale light slip down like a half-hearted blessing. It catches on a helmet, leaning against the wall, then disappears. The men at the post look up as you approach 3 of them, one young enough to still have a smooth chin, the other 2 marked by that familiar trench pallor and the posture of men who have long since stopped trying to stand up straight. You hand the message to the one with the corporal stripes. He unfolds it, reads, it nods. Right, he says, and then more to himself. Figures. He looks at you. Might as well wait here a bit. Word is, we've got company moving up. Not trouble, just change. He doesn't elaborate. You take a seat on a dryish plank beside a stack of sandbags. The young one offers a piece of gum. You decline, though it smells vaguely minty and not entirely unpleasant. They talk among themselves for a few minutes, something about a man who used to deliver letters and now delivers complaints with equal efficiency. You half listen, watching a spider move slowly along a web stretched across a crack in the trench wall. It moves with precision, undisturbed by boots, rifles, or history. After a while, the corporal turns to you. You're the one with the letters. Right, Tinsley mentioned you. You blink. Letters. He nods, carries one in your coat, doesn't read it much, doesn't send any back. You nod more slowly. Something like that. He reaches into his own coat, pulls out a folded envelope, edges worn soft, and holds it out. Been meaning to pass this along. Don't know why it came to us. Probably got sorted wrong. Name on it's yours, though. You take it, fingers brushing his for half a second. The paper is brittle. The ink faded. The name on the front yours. The handwriting is unmistakable, though you hadn't seen it in months, maybe longer. You don't open it right away. Just hold it, feel its weight, such as it is. It's not heavy, but it matters. You tuck it into your coat next to the first letter. The button shifts under your hand. Something about the motion makes you pause. The two buttons, the two letters, neither where they started, neither exactly where they belong. One old, one new, neither opened. You rise. The corporal glances up. Back already. You shake your head. Not yet. Just thinking. He nods, understanding without knowing. You step out of the post, the air cooler. Now the clouds pulling back like curtains at the end of an act. As you begin to walk, you hear the sound again, that same soft rustle in the sky, faint but present. You stop. Look up. The shape returns. You stand still. Boots planted in the sticky trench mud, as your eyes trace the shape drifting across the morning sky, its outline just barely distinguishable from the surrounding gray. It moves slowly, not like a bird, not even like a plane, too smooth for a kite, too deliberate for a trick of the light. You squint, trying to make sense of it, but before clarity arrives, a gust of wind tugs a curl of mist into view, veiling the shape once more like it had never been there at all. You exhale slowly and continue walking, one boot, then the other, the envelope still tucked in your coat, crinkling softly with every step. Your fingers brush it once, then again, as if checking that it's real, as if you might unfold it without meaning to. The trench ahead curves to the left, and as you reach it, a low rumble vibrates through your souls. Distant, steady, the kind that doesn't ask for panic, but invites a kind of quiet attention. You pause and glance behind. The men at post 5 haven't moved. They've returned to their quiet rituals, cleaning boots, adjusting straps, folding empty sacks into neat little squares for reasons no one can quite remember. You push forward. Around the bend, the trench narrows briefly, the walls too close, forcing you to twist slightly sideways to pass. It smells like damp rope and tobacco and something faintly metallic. You emerge into a small junction where someone has attempted, with modest success, to construct a notice board. It's a plank, nailed unevenly into the trench wall, festooned with scraps of newsprint, playing cards, a few bulletins, and one hand-drawn picture of what might be a cow, though its proportions suggest otherwise. Taped beneath it, someone has written, "Better than rations." You stop and glance it over, not for the cow, but for the headlines. Nothing new, nothing useful. A few notes about troop movements you already knew, and a weather report from 2 weeks ago predicting intermittent clouds and optimism. You continue the trench walls, softening slightly here. The boards underfoot, improving in quality, just enough that your boots don't squelch with every step. A few yards ahead, you spot Mason, one of the radio men hunched under an oilcloth tarp that droops like a tired awning. He's fiddling with a coil of wire that seems to have no beginning or end, and his brow is furrowed with the kind of focus that belongs more to artists than soldiers. He doesn't notice you at first. You pause just beside him and clear your throat softly. He jumps only slightly, then grins. "Didn't see you there. You walk like fog." You shrug. Trick of the trench. He nods, eyes darting down to the edge of your coat where the envelope peeks out. He doesn't comment, but you see him glance. You pull the fabric closed. "Just passing through," you offer, and he returns his attention to the wire. "Mind the left boards up ahead," he mutters. "One of them's hollow." You thank him, then step past, continuing down the line. Sure enough, a few steps later, your heel lands on a plank that gives an unsettling, hollow thunk, like stepping on a drum. You quicken your pace just enough to avoid testing it further. Then, a sharp crack, distant overhead. You duck instinctively, pressing your back against the trench wall, but no explosion follows. Just silence. Then, after several heartbeats, a low descending whistle, brief, sharp, sudden. A shell lands somewhere far enough away that the tremor is felt more than heard. You wait, eyes scanning the sky. Another whistle, another dull impact, not close, but not far. You stay crouched, breathing through your mouth, the air tinged with the acrid ghost of cordite. A moment passes, then 2. No follow-up, no cries, just that same returning quiet, this time more brittle around the edges. You exhale again and stand slowly, brushing grit from your coat. The envelope crackles again in your pocket, joined by the faint clink of the button. You wonder briefly what you'll do with them, whether either still means what it meant. You reach the next junction and lean against a crate, pull out a half-used cigarette, and your matchbook, the cover, damp the edges, curling like autumn leaves. You strike one. It fizzles. Strike another. No flame. Third tries it, lights for half a breath before snuffing out. You stare at the blackened tip and consider giving up. But something makes you try again. This time, the match flares. You cup your hands, light the cigarette, and take a long drag. The smoke fills your lungs sharp, comforting in its own stubborn way. As you exhale, the shape returns, this time, lower closer, hovering at the edge of your vision. You squint again, and for just a second, you swear it pauses as if aware. You blink. It's gone. Again. Behind you, someone calls out. Another voice joins it. Not panic, just conversation. Maybe news. You turn slowly, the cigarette smoke curling around your head, and make your way toward the sound. You follow the voices past a sagging section of trench wall where someone's propped up a rifle like a scarecrow and hung a single sock from the barrel, as though hoping it might catch rain or ideas or something else entirely. And as you round the corner, you find 2 privates leaning over a crate that's been turned into a desk of sorts, though its surface is littered with nothing but a dull pencil, a rock that vaguely resembles a potato, and a crumpled page from a field manual detailing the proper use of entrenching tools in situations no one has ever actually experienced. One of the privates looks up, gestures vaguely at the sky behind you. "You seen it?" he asks. "The thing. Up there. Just now." His tone isn't curious, exactly. More resigned, like he's collecting data on something everyone knows about, but doesn't really talk about, like bad stew or trench foot. You nod once, slowly. Could have been smoke you offer. He shrugs. Could have been a message. His companion snorts. Could have been a bird with ambition. They both laugh softly, the kind of laugh that doesn't require humor, just permission. You lean against the trench wall. Feel the damp press through your coat and say nothing for a moment. The envelope in your pocket feels heavier now, as though it's aware of being watched. You shift, pull it out briefly, not to read, just to see it again. The ink has faded more than you realized, the corner creased into a soft curl, like a page turned and forgotten. The name is still there, though. Yours. Underlined once. Not boldly, but purposefully. The taller of the two privates points to the envelope. That from the thing he asks. You shake your head. It's from before. He nods. Right. Before's good. He sits back down on the crate, picks up the potato-shaped rock, and examines it, like it might reveal something new. His companion scribbles something with the pencil, then holds it up. It's a stick figure in a helmet labeled me. The caption reads, "Still here." You nod at it. Not bad. He grins, folds it in half, and tucks it into his coat pocket like a personal achievement. You glance back toward the bend where the cigarette first wouldn't light, then did. The smoke from it has already disappeared, absorbed by the damp, the clouds, the 1,000 invisible hands of the trench air. The wind picks up slightly, and with it comes the scent of something cooking, burned oats again, or possibly wet socks near a fire. Either way, it's familiar. You move on. Past the water station, where someone has stacked empty tins into a wobbly tower, and past the latrine curtain, which flaps idly, as if unsure whether to billow or sulk. Near the next junction, you spot Tinsley. He's kneeling beside the wall, carving something into the wood with a small nail. You step closer. What's it say? He doesn't look up. Just a date. Today's, I think. You wait. After a moment, he adds a small arrow beside the date, pointing left. In case I forget where I was, he explains. You nod. Not a bad idea. He stands, brushes the mud from his knees. Heard we might get rotated. Heard that, too, you reply. Heard it last week, and the week before. He smirks. Hopes, cheaper than socks. You both walk together for a while. Not far. Just enough that the wall changes texture. Again, less dirt, more wood. Reinforced section. Someone's done a decent job with it. Planks line both sides, and a new support beam runs overhead, angled just right to suggest someone knew what they were doing, or at least had a plan. There's a line drawn across the top beam, thin and black, with a number beside it. You glance at Tinsley. Was that here yesterday? He shakes his head. Don't think so. You both stare at it a moment longer. The number isn't threatening. It just is. A marking, a label. You move on. The ground here is firmer, less mud, more gravel. It crunches underfoot loud compared to the usual squish of trench soil. Someone has laid a boardwalk of sorts, 3 planks wide, nailed carefully. Clearly someone's project. At the end of it, a man in an oversized coat leans against a crate, flipping through a small, leather-bound book. As you approach, he snaps it shut and smiles without showing teeth. "You're early," he says. You glance at Tinsley. He raises an eyebrow. "Early for what?" The man shrugs. "Whatever comes next." He gestures toward the trench wall behind him. Someone's painted a white circle there, about the size of a dinner plate, with a line running through it. Below, in chalk, a message. "Not here. Keep going." You stare at it. "What's this for?" The man shrugs again. "Sometimes people need to be told." He doesn't move. You don't ask his name. Tinsley tugs your sleeve lightly, and you both move on past the circle, past the man, past the meaning. You're not sure you want to decode. The trench narrows again this time, dipping slightly downward, and the air grows cooler. You feel the envelope shift again in your coat pressed against your ribs, and now you feel the edge of the second button as well smooth and foreign. You pause, and from ahead, another voice, calm, curious, calls your name once more. The voice calling your name doesn't sound urgent, but it carries with it a familiarity that stops your boots mid-step and draws your eyes toward the end of the narrow trench, like a hook tugging at a sleeve. Tinsley pauses too, his brows tightening as he glances toward you, and then toward the source of the sound, which in the echoing geometry of the trench walls feels close and far at once, like when someone calls from the bottom of a well. You don't answer right away. You just stand there, listening, wondering if the voice is a memory misfiring, or someone with the same vocal pattern as a man you once shared coffee with under a broken wagon axle on a colder day than this one. The trench slopes slightly down, just a few inches at first, but enough that the water puddles into narrow veins along the edges of the duckboards. Tinsley gives you a nudge. "Might be Jennings," he says, though his tone makes it sound more like a question than a statement. You nod, though you know it's not Jennings. The voice didn't carry his scratchy end-of-sentence cough, or that way he stretches words when he's guessing. Still, you move forward. Carefully. The boards here creak underfoot in a manner that suggests they've seen fewer boots than elsewhere. The walls are smoother, too less worn, less scraped, as if this section of trench has not yet settled into the weariness that marks the rest. On the right, a small wooden sign has been tacked into the mud. It's blank. No name, no direction, just wood and nails. You touch it as you pass, not expecting it to respond, but half wanting it to explain itself. Ahead, the trench takes a gentle turn, and past it, a broader space opens something halfway between a dugout and a supply station, though neither term seems quite right. There are crates, yes, but stacked in precise rows, not the usual haphazard piles. A table stands in the center, its surface clean, save for a single enamel mug and a folded woolen cap. Behind the table, a man sits, not standing, not shifting weight from foot to foot, like most do when the ground is uneven. He sits with both hands resting on the tabletop, fingers slightly curled, as though they might close around something or release it, depending on your answer to a question he hasn't yet asked. You don't recognize him, but he looks at you like he knows your name, your rank, and what you carry in your left pocket. "Been waiting," he says, not quite smiling. His voice matches the one that called out. Tinsley steps forward, then stops. "You with 2nd Platoon?" he asks, squinting. The man shakes his head. "No, not anymore." That answer silences everything for a moment. Even the wind hesitates. You glance at Tinsley, who suddenly finds something very interesting in the state of his bootlaces. The man gestures toward a stool by the table. "Have a seat," he offers. You hesitate, then lower yourself slowly onto the stool. The wood creaks under your weight, not in protest, but in acknowledgement. Across the table, the man studies you. Not like an officer evaluating a report, but like someone trying to remember where they left a familiar book. "You've got something," he says, and this time his voice dips just slightly, not in volume, but in weight. You feel your hand drift to your coat, where the envelope presses against your side, like a small, curious animal. You pull it out, lay it gently on the table. He doesn't reach for it. He just looks at it. Then he leans forward slightly and says, "Not that one." Your fingers pause. Then, slowly, you reach into the other pocket and remove the second envelope, the one you never meant to carry, the one with no stamp, no seal, no sender. The button shifts as you do, tumbling slightly, as if it too wants to see what comes next. You place the second envelope beside the first. The man's gaze lingers on it. Then he nods just once, like someone confirming a memory. "That's the one," he says. "Didn't expect it'd find its way back." You want to ask what it is, who sent it, why you have it. But the words don't come. Not out of fear, There's nothing threatening in his manner, just that sensation that questions might scatter the moment like stepping too heavily on thin ice. He reaches forward now, not quickly, but with deliberate care, picks up the second envelope, turns it over, and slips it into his coat without opening it. Then he sighs, a deep, contented sigh, like someone easing into a chair after a long walk. Well, he says that's settled then. He doesn't explain what that is, and you don't ask. Instead, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small object, a button identical to the one you found near the crate 2 nights ago. He places it beside yours. They match exactly. You stare. The man watches you. Sometimes things return in pieces, he says. Sometimes they just wait. He stands, now, stretches his arms slowly, as though shaking off the weight of the years. You should go, he adds. It'll be light soon, real light, not this pretend morning. You look at Tinsley, who gives a small shrug and nod. You stand. The stool makes no sound this time. You pocket the original envelope again, and the matching button now next to its twin. The man doesn't speak again. He just turns and steps through a narrow opening in the trench wall. You hadn't noticed before, a path lined with stones and a low arch. It isn't marked. It isn't mapped. But it's there. Then he's gone. You and Tinsley look at each other. The wind returns. The mug on the table tips slightly, then steadies. Behind you, the trench stretches on, and from its curve, another faint voice begins to rise. The voice is low at first, almost easy to mistake for wind brushing across old canvas or water slipping through the trench seams. But it carries the cadence of speech, the gentle rise and fall of syllables shaped by intention rather than accident, and you and Tinsley both turn instinctively, boots shifting against the gravel and half-packed mud beneath you as your eyes seek its source. Nothing appears around the curve. At first, just the same worn boards, the same slouching sandbags, the same small ruts carved by foot traffic and rain. But the voice continues, now clearer, and it's speaking names, not loudly, not sharply, but one at a time, as though calling roll for a class that forgot it had signed up. You recognize one of the names barely. A man from 3 trenches over who left 2 weeks ago on a stretcher covered up to the eyes. He hadn't spoken on the way out. Now apparently he's being summoned. You glance at Tinsley. His mouth is a thin line. That sound like Crawley to you? He asks quietly. You nod, or someone who remembers how Crawley sounded. Neither of you speaks for a moment. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, you step away from the table, leaving the mug and the cap untouched, and retrace your steps through the trench, past the chalk circle, and the blank sign, and the man who isn't there anymore. The air feels heavier, somehow, not oppressive, just more aware of itself. You walk carefully, the kind of careful that isn't caution, but courtesy, like tiptoeing through someone else's dream. The envelope in your pocket sits quietly. Now, the weight of it, somehow less important than the presence. You reach the bend again and pause. A few yards ahead, the voice has stopped. The space beyond is quieter than you remember, like the sound itself took a step back to reconsider. Then, from the left, a new figure emerges, shorter, wrapped in a too large coat cap, pulled low, eyes squinting, as though from habit rather than light. He's holding a clipboard, not a rifle, not a shovel, a clipboard. And when he spots you, he raises a hand in greeting with the air of someone offering directions rather than orders. "Rations report," he says, tapping the board. "Need confirmation from Section 4. You look at Tinsley, who raises an eyebrow. "There is no Section 4, he says. The man frowns, checks the clipboard again, says, "Right here." Section 4 attached to third line, adjacent to marker 41. You blink. Marker 41 was added yesterday. Exactly, the man says, as though this proves something. He flips the board toward you, and indeed, there it is, handwritten in neat script, a new line, Section 4, pending confirmation. No names, no notes, just pending. What happens if it's not confirmed? Tinsley asks. The man shrugs. Doesn't get counted. Then he turns and walks off without another word, disappearing around a corner that wasn't part of the original trench design, a curve that folds like an afterthought or an apology. You both stand there for a moment longer. Then Tinsley mutters, "I'm going to make some tea," and walks back toward the main trench, path boots dragging just enough to suggest he's tired of upright things. You remain looking at the path the clipboard man took. It's empty now. No footprints, just smooth, damp earth, as though no one had ever walked it at all. You take a step forward, then another, and the trench opens again, subtly different, wider, perhaps, or slightly tilted, or maybe just painted with a new kind of silence. The air here doesn't carry the scent of stew or tobacco. Instead, it smells faintly of pencil shavings and soap. Ahead, another sign, this one, not blank. It reads, simply, "Report." Below the word, a small bin hangs from a peg filled with folded papers some torn, some damp. You reach in and pull one out. It's dated for tomorrow. It lists names you don't know, and one that's almost yours, spelled slightly wrong, with a middle initial that isn't yours, but close enough that it feels intentional. The bottom of the page says, "Already processed." You fold it back, place it in the bin, and turn around. The trench is empty. Not deserted, just momentarily paused. You hear a spoon clink against a tin in the distance. The harmonica again soft, still undecided on a melody. You return to the bend. The sock on the rifle is gone now, replaced by a glove, left hand only. Tinsley reappears a moment later, carrying a dented kettle and 2 cups that don't match. "Still hot," he says, pouring you one. The steam smells faintly of mint and something like burnt sugar. You sip. It's bitter, but it's tea. Across from you, Tinsley pulls a button from his pocket, like yours, but rusted, worn edges, chipped. He sets it on the crate between you. "Found this near the latrine," he says. "Didn't know if it was yours." You shake your head. "I don't think anything is." He nods, and neither of you speaks again for a while. Behind you, the sky shifts slightly, clouds pulling like old curtains, revealing not light, but something shaped like direction. Far down the trench, someone starts singing. Not a song you know, but one that sounds like it used to be sung by people who had reasons. The tune carries weaving between the sandbags, curling like steam from the kettle. You drink your tea, you wait, you listen, and from the far side of the trench, a new sound begins to rise. The sound begins low, almost like the humming of bees, or the friction of wool against canvas, and for a moment you think it's just the wind wrapping around a loose flap of tarp, or the usual complaints of trench timber flexing under weathered pressure. But then it deepens into something melodic, slow rhythmic. Not quite a song, not quite a chant, just a string of syllables that move like breath over stone. Tinsley tilts his head, the dented cup of tea balanced in his hand, now cooling between sips. "That's new?" he murmurs, not asking you to agree, just offering a shared observation, like pointing out moss on an old boot. You nod and stare down the trench where the sound is coming from, but nothing moves there. Not even the usual parade of rats or the shifting outlines of men pretending not to be awake. You drain the last of your tea, bitter at the bottom, and set the cup beside the button Tinsley found, which now sits next to your own, like 2 coins on a table, waiting to be flipped. The envelope remains in your coat, pressed flat against the fabric, a quiet constant. The other, the one you gave away, has left no trace in your pocket, just a sense of lighter air. You rise and start toward the origin of the sound, your boots catching on the edge of a loose plank that squeaks in protest but doesn't break. Tinsley follows, without comment, his steps falling into rhythm beside yours, like they always do, when silence seems like the best answer to questions you haven't yet asked. The trench curves slightly to the right, where someone has propped up a piece of chalkboard scavenged from a schoolhouse or a train station signpost no one really remembers anymore. On it, someone has written 3 words in neat block letters: List pending confirmation. Beneath that, a short list of names, none of which you recognize, though the third one starts with your initial, and for a moment your eyes snag on it before moving on. The chalk dust gathers in the bottom corners of the board gray, against gray, like it's trying to dissolve itself. The humming has stopped now, or perhaps it's still going, and your ears have simply stopped caring. You press onward, past a series of crates someone tried to turn into a bench, but gave up halfway, leaving them stacked unevenly, like a shrug. Ahead, the trench wall dips again, and then rises into a slightly wider chamber. A storage nook, maybe, or a meeting point, once used for purposes now outdated. Inside, 4 men sit in a loose circle, passing around a canteen and a small ledger, the kind with cloth corners and a string-tied spine. One of them looks up as you enter and nods. You're here for the confirmation. He says, not as a question, but as if reading it from a paper he'd already filed. You hesitate, but Tinsley steps forward. We didn't sign up for anything, he says, calm but firm. The man shrugs. Nobody does. Not at first. He gestures toward the 5th stool, empty, worn smooth in the center. You sit, because it seems easier than asking why. The ledger passes to you. You open it. The pages are filled with dates, initials, and what might be destinations or destinations that have since become metaphors. You find your name or something close to it on the next page. It's already checked off. Tinsley leans over your shoulder. That your handwriting? You shake your head. Not quite. The man with the canteen taps the bottom of the page. That line there, he says. It's yours to complete. You follow his finger to a blank line beneath the checked names. Nothing but space. Complete it with what you ask. Whatever you carried with you, he replies. You think of the envelope, the buttons, the pencil drawing tucked away from earlier, the T, the carved arrow, the chalkboard, the watch you no longer carry. You think of the path with no footprints and the list that spelled your name with too much confidence. You pick up the stub of pencil tied to the ledger's spine and press it to the paper. You write one word. You're not sure why that one, but it fits the line. When you finish, no one claps. No one nods. The man simply closes the book and sets it on his lap, where it sits like a sleeping animal. Tinsley stands. So do you. One of the others says, "Weather's changing." And outside it is. Not in true color or scent, but in feeling. The trench doesn't feel heavier or lighter, just more certain, like it knows where it ends now. You and Tinsley walk back toward the bend. The chalkboard is blank again. The sound has stopped. Behind you, one of the men in the chamber begins to hum again, very faintly, and from farther down the line, someone new appears, carrying a folded slip of paper that looks suspiciously like the kind you once delivered. He pauses as he sees you, hesitates, then asks almost politely, "Are you still on this side?" You don't answer, but you nod, and he nods back. He turns down a trench you hadn't seen before, one that curves left and vanishes behind a veil of steam or fog, or maybe just timing. The trench beside you breathes. Tinsley pulls a worn card from his coat pocket, flips it over, and says, "Guess I'll find out what this was for, after all." He starts walking. You follow. Neither of you speaks. But from the far end of the trench, where the horizon tries once more to rise through the clouds, someone begins calling names again. The names float gently through the morning air. Not shouted, not even spoken with much force, just allowed to exist, syllables riding the thin currents of mist, like small boats without sails. And you and Tinsley walk toward the sound, because that's what you do when directions run out and only intention remains. The trench here narrows again, not sharply, but in the way rooms seem to shrink when everyone's sitting too close, and you duck slightly as a new length of timber juts out just high enough to graze your cap. The boards underfoot are damp, but more even now, as though recently replaced, or simply cared for in a way that suggests someone with both tools and time, which is rarer than either alone. Up ahead, a lantern hangs from a hook hammered into the trench wall at a slight angle, its flame swaying gently behind fogged glass. Beside it, pinned with 2 nails and a bent spoon, is a square of cloth stitched with what at first looks like nonsense. Red thread, zigzagging across the surface in tight, erratic patterns. But the longer you look, the more it resembles a map. Not of trenches, not of land, but maybe of something between the two, a web of paths that don't quite lead anywhere unless you already know where you're meant to arrive. Tinsley stops in front of it, tilts his head. "That's thread from a ration sack," he mutters. "Used to patch my coat with it." You nod. Seems more useful like this. A few steps farther, on a bench, has been carved directly into the trench wall, the mud packed tight behind it, the wood smoothed flat. A canteen rests on one end, lid unscrewed, but not removed, as if someone was about to drink, and then forgot what they were doing. You sit down less out of exhaustion than to see what happens. Tinsley remains standing, one hand resting on the edge of the lantern hook, like he's checking for heat. The names continue. Now they're closer, and with them comes a familiar rhythm, not of the voice itself, but of breath between the names. A steady exhale, every third syllable. The sound of someone who knows each name by heart, but not by face. The speaker comes into view, an older man, maybe, though the age is hard to judge. His coat is long, and patched sleeves rolled once at the cuff's cap, set neatly, but without pretense. He carries a small notebook open in one hand, thumb holding the page as he recites. He sees you pauses just enough to mark the spot in his book, and nods as though he's expecting you, but also understands if you choose not to acknowledge him yet. Not many left, he says, voice still low, but still enough. You nod. You're reading from a real list. He nods in return. It was once. Tinsley shifts his weight, glances down the trench, and now the man closes the book gently, holding it as one might hold a bird, fingers curved, but not tight. Now it's what's remembered. Close enough. You don't ask what he means. Some things in the trench explain themselves just by staying still long enough. He sits beside you on the bench, not crowding, just arriving. The silence that follows isn't awkward, just wide. You hear water dripping slowly somewhere behind the wall. The older man opens the notebook again, flips 3 pages forward, then 1 back, then stops. You had something to return, he says. Did it find its way? You think of the envelope, the one you carried for too long, and gave away to a man without a name and a button that matched your own. It did, you say? Didn't need to be read. The man nods. Some don't. They just need to be passed. Tinsley squats down, now draws a line in the dirt with a small twig. Why here? He asks, not looking up. Why all this now? The man doesn't answer directly. Instead, he reaches into his coat and pulls out a folded card, creased 3 ways, the edges softened from repetition. He hands it to you. It's blank, at first. Then, slowly, so slowly, you begin to see faint lines rising like old ink in damp paper. A name. Not yours, but close. A date. Long past. A single phrase at the bottom. Still in process. You hand it back. He doesn't take it, just nods toward your coat. Yours now, he says. Only carries what you allow. You pocket it. The button presses against it, silent. From farther down the trench, another figure appears, younger, carrying a lantern brighter than the first, and behind them, more light. The trench is changing, not widening or deepening, but softening, losing its hard edges. The names stop. The list has ended. The man beside you closes his notebook, ties it shut with a piece of string, and stands. Next path's ready, he says. You'll know it when it's yours. He walks away, not quickly, not slowly, just with the certainty of someone who no longer needs directions. Tinsley finally rises, brushing the dirt from his trousers. Almost like it matters, he says, but just almost. You smile. He doesn't. Not yet. But you walk together past the map of thread and the bench and the canteen, and ahead, the lanterns grow brighter, the fog thinner, and from somewhere, just out of sight, a new sound begins a rustle, like paper being folded, or maybe pages turning where no book has been written yet. You and Tinsley move toward the rustle without speaking, your boots scuffing softly against the firmer floorboards, now visible beneath the thinning layer of mud, as if the trench has decided at last to reveal its better intentions. The lanterns sway gently overhead, their metal hooks groaning in slow metallic sighs that seem older than the boards and newer than the air, and the fog no longer obscures so much as it reframes, details, sharpening at the edge of sight, just long enough to be forgotten again. The rustling continues, rhythmic, purposeful, as though someone is folding something with care rather than haste, and you follow its pull with the same quiet instinct that leads a man to water or warmth or a name he hasn't heard in a while. Around the next bend, where the trench has begun to flatten slightly, as though considering becoming a road, you find a figure seated at a low crate, carefully arranging small slips of paper into neat rows. There are dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, though they don't appear chaotic. Each one is placed with intention. Some overlapping, like roof tiles, others angled slightly, as if to remind you that not everything aligns. The figure looks up, briefly, nods once, then returns to the papers. Their hands move slowly, almost reverently, fingertips stained with ink, and something like dust, but finer, softer, the kind that clings without burdening. Tinsley steps forward, crouching beside one of the rows. "They blank?" he asks. The figure looks up again, and this time speaks. "They were. Not now." You move closer, noticing faint writing on the top slip, your name spelled correctly. This time, no initials, no embellishments, just your name and a time that hasn't happened yet. Beneath it, a simple notation. Noted, not filed. You look at the figure, unsure what to ask, but they offer an explanation without being prompted. Some names never leave the page. They're just there in case. You nod, not because you understand, but because the motion feels like the correct punctuation. Tinsley glances at another slip, his name, of course, written in a different hand, the letters sharp at the corners. His note reads, "Observed, untethered." He frowns slightly, folds his arms. Sounds like a weather report. The figure chuckles, and the sound is dry, but not unkind. Sometimes it is. You sit now, not quite beside the figure, but close enough to see that the crate they use as a desk is covered in small carvings, arrows, stars, even the outline of a boot with a missing heel. You wonder how long it's been here. Possibly since before you arrived. Possibly longer than that. One of the papers flutters slightly in the breeze, revealing a thread beneath it. Red course stitched into the crate itself, running along the grain of the wood like a guide. It leads off the back of the crate and into the wall of the trench, disappearing into a narrow seam between boards. You follow it with your eyes. The figure notices. "That one's not for following," they say. "That one's just to remind us it could have been." You look back at the paper with your name. It hasn't moved. You don't touch it. You don't need to. It already knows. The light from the lantern above shifts now, casting long shadows across the page like brush strokes. The figure reaches beneath the crate and pulls out a roll of cloth, soft frayed at one end, and begins wrapping it around the papers, folding them in layers, like pages in a book no one intends to close. Tinsley watches silently, his fingers brushing the edge of his own paper, as if confirming it's still there. Then the figure speaks again. "You'll be moving forward now. Not much left behind. Not much ahead either, but at least it's forward." You both stand. The air feels cooler now, not cold, just expectant. From beyond the crate, the trench begins to slope gently upward, the boards at your feet, giving way to packed earth that has been stepped on only lightly, as if by men with somewhere to be, but no schedule to keep. The figure does not follow. They continue folding papers into the cloth carefully, deliberately, as though each one has earned a specific angle. You and Tinsley step past them, side by side, again, your pace even. No rush. The trench narrows once more before widening unexpectedly, revealing an open section under a stretched canvas roof supported by poles that don't quite match. Here a new bench awaits, low-worn, smooth and empty, save for a spool of thread sitting upright in the center. This thread is gray, untouched, unspooled. Tinsley stops, picks it up, turns it in his hand. This one doesn't lead anywhere, he observes. Not yet, you reply. Ahead, the trench ends, not in a wall or a barricade, but in a gentle, upward slope, leading into pale light, soft and directionless, like the beginning of fog, before it becomes fog. The sound of rustling has ceased. The lanterns do not follow, but the path remains, and from somewhere behind you, a single slip of paper, still unfolded, flutters briefly on the breeze before settling once again beneath the thread, unread but understood. You stand at the edge where the trench ceases to be trench and begins to fade like a memory that hasn't quite settled the upward slope before you. Soft and uncertain, composed of packed earth and scattered stones that seem to ask permission before you step on them. The pale light ahead is neither dawn nor day, but something in between, a hesitant glow that suggests possibility without promise. Tinsley is beside you, hands tucked deep into the pockets of his coat, eyes tracing the slope as though reading invisible lines that only soldiers who've carried burdens might see. The spool of gray thread rests quietly between you on the worn bench, untouched, but no longer unnoticed, a symbol of paths not taken or stories not yet told. You both step forward, slowly, boots making soft contact with the earth. Each step, a small surrender to whatever lies beyond the fading trench walls. The air here feels different, not heavier or lighter, just altered, as if the very act of moving forward has shifted the balance between past and future. Behind you, the wooden crate remains folded papers, tucked beneath thread, secrets held tight, but willing to breathe in the quiet. The rustle you heard earlier is gone now, replaced by the steady, muted rhythm of your own footsteps. You reach the crest of the slope and pause, looking back once more at the trench, its twisting form etched into the landscape like a scar that both marks and heals. The wind catches your coat, lifting the edges like a gentle breath, and for a moment the world holds still. Tinsley exhales slowly, the sound carrying a mixture of relief and resignation. "This is it, then," he says quietly, not a question, but an acknowledgement of an ending and a beginning. You nod words unnecessary in the presence of such delicate balance. Ahead, the pale light grows steadily brighter, revealing fields that stretch into the horizon, hazy and uncertain, dotted with shadows that might be trees or ruins or memories waiting to be shaped. The ground beneath your feet softens from packed earth to grass, though the grass is tentative, new as if unsure it belongs here. Somewhere distant, a bird calls a single clear note that cuts through the quiet with unexpected clarity. You watch it rise and fall, caught between flight and stillness, a fleeting emblem of freedom. The buttons in your pocket press gently against the fabric, a subtle reminder of the weight you carry and the small tokens of the journey you've made. The letters, folded and tucked away, speak of connections that stretch across time and space, bridges between who you were and who you might become. Tinsley looks at you, eyes brightening just a little. "You think we'll remember this place?" he asks. You consider the question, the weight of the trench behind you, and the openness before you. Maybe you say, maybe only in the spaces between words, the pauses in the song. He smiles a brief, honest thing, and you both begin walking down the gentle slope together. The grass brushes your boots soft and cool, and the sky above shifts from pale gray to a tentative blue. The path ahead is unmarked, but not unknown. It stretches on a quiet invitation rather than a command. And as you move forward, the sounds of the trench fade, replaced by the steady pulse of your own breath, and the faint whisper of a thread unraveling slowly in the wind, unseen, unheard, but always there, waiting to be followed.